India's geopolitical reality is unique and it is worth stating plainly. We share borders with two nuclear armed adversaries, China and Pakistan. We are surrounded by smaller but strategically vital neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. Afghanistan anchors our gateway to Central Asia and remains a critical buffer against terrorism. The Indian Ocean, once a relatively peaceful backyard, is now a fiercely contested arena of great power competition. The neighbourhood is no longer India's sphere of influence by default. It has become a contested strategic space full of both opportunity and risk. The most consequential structural shift in India's neighbourhood over the past decade has been China's transformation from a cautious regional player into an assertive expressionist power. And China views India not as a partner but as a potential threat. Pakistan continues to operate under a deeply embedded adversarial framework towards India. Terrorism and military confrontation remain instruments of Pakistani state policy. We must treat this hostility not as an occasional crisis to be managed, but as a structural feature of the relationship to be countered with substantial resolve. Operation Sindoor demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that India has found space for effective conventional operations below the nuclear threshold. Let me begin with the truth that should concern all of us deeply. The neighborhood India wakes up to every morning looks nothing like the one our strategic planners mapped a decade ago. From the Himalayas to the Indian Ocean, from Dhaka to Kabul, the landscape has shifted beneath our feet, not gradually, but with a speed and severity that demands we pay attention, adapt, and act with purpose. India's geopolitical reality is unique and it is worth stating plainly. We share borders with two nuclear armed adversaries, China and Pakistan. We are surrounded by smaller but strategically vital neighbors, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. Afghanistan anchors our gateway to Central Asia and remains a critical buffer against terrorism. The Indian Ocean, once a relatively peaceful backyard, is now a fiercely contested arena of great power competition. The neighbourhood is no longer India's sphere of influence by default. It has become a contested strategic space full of both opportunity and risk. The most consequential structural shift in India's neighbourhood over the past decade has been China's transformation from a cautious regional player into an assertive expressionist power. And China views India not as a partner but as a potential threat, a reality we can no longer afford to look away from. India-China relations reached a turning point with the 2017 Doklam standoff, when China's assertiveness along the line of actual control became impossible to ignore. The 2020 Galwan Valley clash was a watershed moment, a violent reminder of how quickly tensions can escalate. It triggered large-scale military buildup on both sides, with over 100,000 troops deployed across the Himalayan frontier. What was once described as a managed competition has since evolved into what I would call armed coexistence. Permanent forward deployments, accelerated infra construction, which was referred to by Honorable RRM also, and heightened military readiness have fundamentally altered the strategic equilibrium along our northern borders. Today, our close to 3,488 kilometer Himalayan frontier is no longer a distant administrative boundary. It is a live pressure point. China's Belt and Road investment in our neighborhood, from Gwadar in Pakistan to the Mongla port in Bangladesh, from Hambantota in Sri Lanka to growing influence in the Maldives, have stitched together a strategic footprint that now encircles India's maritime domain. The Indian Ocean is no longer a benign backyard. It has become a competitive theatre. What concerns me most is not only any single node in this network, but the coherence of the design. Every port upgraded, every road built, every political leader cultivated, is a piece of a larger strategic puzzle that Beijing has been assembling with remarkable patience and consistency. India has sometimes responded project by project, crisis by crisis. We need a coherent counter architecture of our own. Post 2024, disengagement agreements at Depsang and Nemchok and renewed dialogue through the special representative mechanisms and the BRICS Kazan summit have thawed relations somewhat. In 2025, China continued its military modernization. The Fujian aircraft carrier became operational, and all of us should remember the Grand Military Parade in September 25, showcasing China's growing might, which was held to commemorate its victory in World War II. Beijing simultaneously expanded strategic partnerships across the global south and deepened ties with Russia. The competition is real, the rivalry is structural, and the pressure on India will not ease. India's response must be equally structural. We must accelerate border infra, roads, tunnels, airfields, with a target of completing over 100 BRO projects by 2027. We must deepen Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense, particularly in drones, air defense systems, and semiconductors. And we must sustain the Quad alliance with US, Japan, Australia as a counterweight to China's regional ambitions, while managing economic decoupling from Chinese supply chains without triggering unnecessary escalation. Now let's look at Bangladesh, which is perhaps the starkest example of how quickly a trusted neighbor can drift into uncertain territory. The ouster of Sheikh Hasina in 2024 and the anti-India sentiment that followed under the caretaker government of Muhammad Yunus have ended what we call the golden era of India-Bangladesh ties. The banning of the Awami League and the warming of Bangladesh ties with Pakistan have been troubling developments. More alarming has been the deepening of Bangladesh's relationship with China. Not merely economic but military. The inauguration of a Chinese industrial economic zone in Chattogram, the 400 million Mongla port modernization plan, and zero tariff access for Bangladeshi imports all signal a strategic pivot. Establishment of a drone manufacturing plant at Bogra, a joint venture with China's CETC, gives Bangladesh indigenous capacity to produce surveillance and strike drones. There is a Forces Goal 2030 framework which is poised to transform Bangladesh's military posture. Planned acquisition of a 4.5 generation multi-role fighter alongside discussions for the JF-17 Thunder from Pakistan marks a generational shift in Bangladesh's air power ambitions. These are not the decisions of an adversary, but they are the decisions of a neighbor that no longer sees India as its default security guarantor. The return to democracy, though, Bangladesh Nationalist Party is a genuine positive and we must build on it. Ongoing connectivity projects like the Agartala-Akhora rail link must remain functional. We must address Bangladesh's sovereignty concerns maturely, work bilaterally on new projects, and have frank conversations about the use of civilian ports like Mongla as potential logistics hub for external naval project powers. Now we should look at the Himalayan oceanic fringe, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka and Maldives. Now Nepal's political turbulence, which was seen in 2025, carries direct implication for India's northern security calculus. There was street mobilization which toppled an elected government, and it had raised questions about the resilience of democratic institutions along our sensitive frontier. For India, this presents both a warning and an opportunity. Nepal's new leadership is likely to prioritize hydropower, infra, and digital connectivity, and we must be ready to meet those expectations through genuine economic diplomacy and not just gestures. The security dimensions are harder to ignore. Nepal's engagement with China under the Belt and Road Initiative, through connectivity nodes like Pokhara Airport and the Rasuwagadhi-Jalong link, steadily advances Beijing's logistical access towards our border. Nepal seeks to reduce its 70% trade dependence of India. We have to respond with patience, not panic, securing strategic interests without confrontation and strengthening joint border patrols and intelligence sharing to counter smuggling, illegal infiltration and translational crime. Now, Sri Lanka's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of debt finance growth and a testament to what good neighbors do in a crisis. Excessive borrowing under China's Belt and Road Initiative led to a catastrophic economic collapse. Foreign reserves dried up, inflation soared, and a presidential resignation followed. For India, this was not merely an economic event happening next door, it was a near state failure in our immediate maritime neighborhood. So we stepped up. We provided economic assistance, food, fuel, humanitarian support, not out of political calculation, but because that is what a responsible neighbor does. Today, under President Anurag Kumar Dissanayake, Sri Lanka has emerged as one of India's most important regional partners. The lesson here is profound. In the Indian Ocean, influence will increasingly flow not from coercion, but from economic stabilization, connectivity, and crisis responsiveness. Afghanistan, meanwhile, has grappled with isolation and cautious diplomatic engagement since Taliban's return to power in 2021. India's interest in Afghanistan expanded significantly in 2025 across security, strategic connectivity, diplomatic engagement, and humanitarian considerations. We remain deeply concerned about the potential reactivation of anti-India militant networks from Afghanistan territory. Strategically, Afghanistan is the core element of India's Connect Central Asia framework. Any deterioration in Afghanistan or renewed extremist activity poses a direct security risk to us. India has built genuine goodwill in Afghanistan over decades through schools, dams, roads, parliament building, etc. The ongoing hostilities between Pakistan and Afghanistan, marked by cross-border strikes, create a complex but occasionally advantageous security environment for us. By diverting Pakistan's attention and military resources away from our western border, India has publicly reaffirmed support for Afghanistan's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. We must continue this calibrated engagement, invest in capacity building, harden our border security against threats that manifest through Pakistani routes and narcotics networks, and treat domestic preparedness as forward defense. And now I come to the neighbor that has been compelled to reshape its entire politico-military structure in the wake of Operation Sindoor, Pakistan. Let us be clear about something that which gets lost in diplomatic language. Pakistan continues to operate under a deeply embedded adversarial framework towards India. Terrorism and military confrontation remain instruments of Pakistani state policy. We must treat this hostility not as an occasional crisis to be managed, but as a structural feature of the relationship to be countered with substantial resolve. Operation Sindoor demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that India has found space for effective conventional operations below the nuclear threshold. It changed the terms of the relationship in ways that will take years to fully unfold. Pakistan's response has been revealing. In August 25, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif announced the formation of the Army Rocket Force Command, the ARFC, modeled on China's People's Liberation Army Rocket Force. This was announced on the eve of Pakistan's 78th Independence Day, 3 months after the May 25 conflict, and it tells us something important. Pakistan could not use its missile effectively during Op Sindoor either because of the threat of Indian retaliation or because of civilian control constraints. The ARFC is Pakistan's attempt to create a dedicated conventional deterrence layer, one that can strike Indian military targets deep inside our territory without crossing the nuclear threshold. This represents a doctrinal shift toward non-contact standoff warfare, towards what analysts call deterrence by punishment. Then came Pakistan's 27th Constitutional Amendment in November 25, passed with remarkable and troubling haste. Amendments to Article 243 abolished the post of Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, a post that had provided tri-service coordination since 1976. In its place was created the post of Chief of Defence Forces, with the Army Chief automatically holding this position. This constitutionally concentrates authority over all three services, that is Army, Navy and Air Force, as well as the National Strategic Command, which controls Pakistan's nuclear arsenal in the hands of a single individual. The haste of this restructuring, the centralization it represents, and the land-centric mindset it reflects are themselves acknowledgements of the deficiencies exposed during the conflict. What does this mean for India? It means crisis may evolve faster, escalation ladders may compress, conventional conflict space will expand, decision making in Islamabad may become quicker but also more prone to error. We are not dealing with the same Pakistan we managed for the past 3 decades. The deterrence dynamics have become more complex and India's responses must be calibrated accordingly. India has pursued the right framework, the neighbourhood first policy, the Saga doctrine, security and growth for all in the region, and our expanding defence diplomacy reflect a mature and multi-layered approach to the region.